We're going to keep on fighting for real economic relief for working people in every way we can.
It's important to be part of a union because you have to have a voice.
Welcome to Union Talk. I'm Randi Weingarten.
Hi, everyone. I'm Randi Weingarten, and this is another episode of Union Talk. And today we're talking about something that, frankly, is squeezing working people everywhere, particularly in the United States of America, and that is rising costs. And even before the war in Iran, and we've seen basically the cost of gas and oil go up about $1 in the pumps in the last month. But even before that huge change in terms of, what people can afford at the pump, we've seen costs rising in groceries, in healthcare, in housing. And what we haven't seen, as much as, we really believe in collective bargaining and what we need to do to raise wages, we certainly haven't seen an increase in the minimum wage in the federal government, and we certainly have seen a flattening of wages in terms of Americans. So we really, it's not just that gas is too damn high, it's that we have, on all accounts, an affordability crisis. And we really wanted today to talk to people who are animating this fight for our union. And we went to our own members and said, look, this is a thing. We're hearing this everywhere. Do you want to fill out this survey about what's going on in your own lives? And what's happened is that we heard from 7,500 people. And this podcast is hearing from real people on the ground, including two of our members who I have seen their stories, and they will share their perspective about what it's like to actually try to work incredibly hard on behalf of others and not and have a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen in your own life. And I am really honored to be joined by Rebecca Mickelson, who is a school counselor and member of the Albuquerque Federation of Teachers, and by Vicki Morris, who is a middle school speech pathologist and is the president of our Park Forest Local and the vice president of AFT Local 604 in Illinois. I want to just say thank you to both of you for being with us. And, I want to just ask you, before we dive into this issue, both of you, tell us a little bit about yourselves so that, the people who are listening to the podcast get a sense of who you are. So, Rebecca, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Vicki.
Yikes. Okay. Thanks. Right now, I'm a full-time school counselor in New Mexico. I work primarily in Title I schools. I'm at an alternative high school, and I'm also subbing in for an elementary school right now as well, both Title I, as I've said. I am also a single mom of 3 young adults trying to transition into that next phase of life. So added expense. It's wonderful.
Everything.
I've also been very blessed in that, I did acquire my home prior to the housing market becoming just undeniably unaffordable for most families. And I've paid off all of my student debt. I've done what I would perceive as every step traditionally right, yet I'm financially strained with the rising cost of housing, food, utilities, healthcare, super fun at the age of 55, and being female. Fun pink tax there. So right now my income, my cost of living is outpacing my income.
Yeah. I really appreciate you sharing that with us. And look, before we go to Vicki, for anybody who's listening, these are people who are school counselors, speech pathologists. These are jobs that at one point or another really had a middle class income. And both Rebecca and Vicky, every single day, are working on behalf of other people, making a difference in the lives of other people. And yet, because of life around them, it's this huge stress and strain. Vicky, will you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm a middle school speech pathologist by day. And because I love working with the kids that I work with so much, I thought it would be a great idea to open my own practice. So in the evenings, I have a clinic for pediatric speech and occupational therapy, which I do after school and during the summers. The idea was the school salary kept up with day-to-day costs, but I have kids that were going to college. So my business, I really wanted to help fund my kids' college. With the increase in healthcare costs, families who were signed up for services started dropping out and left on bills unpaid. So I have lots of outstanding accounts that people have unpaid bills because they can't afford it, which makes me have to continue to borrow because now my school salary can't pay my other therapists that I have working at the clinic either. So, my school salary is supposed to cover my home. And then again, with 2 young adult children also, we make too much money. My husband's a police officer, and between his salary and mine, we make too much for our kids to be really eligible for any student loan benefits or anything of that nature. So we are doing this all ourselves and trying to figure it out. And a quarterly tax estimates that we have to pay every year are what we pay on our mortgage every year. It's ridiculous. And we are struggling between the grocery. Our collective bargaining agreement increases don't keep up with the cost of living. Right. So while they're trying to throw money at new grads, which is great, we want to encourage people to come to the field. The people who have been around forever are really struggling to make the ends meet. So it's been a challenge across the board with all of the members that we serve as well.
Oh my God, I am so sorry for both of you, but this is part of the reason why we have taken on as a union all the aspects of affordability. And, for those who don't know, I just want to do some high points of the survey, which was our survey of our members, which is that 74% of the people who answered the survey told us they're living month to month, paycheck to paycheck. And I think both Vicky and Rebecca have shared how that's happening in their families. 35% report being unable to afford to cover all their monthly bills. 8 in 10 identified housing costs as a challenge. Nearly 1 of 3 reported using a credit card to pay their utility bills, and utility bills have really gone, is this kind of secret, hidden, huge problem that has now happened in the last few months. And 49% reported paying for medical or dental care with a credit card over the past 12 months. So what we're seeing in our membership is that the use of debt is what's kind of balancing the bills for a month. We've often said debt is a death sentence for student debt, but credit card debt is really becoming this overarching problem. I suspect a bunch of people who this is happening to too.
Yeah. Personally, yes.
Yeah. I even had one of our members wanted an advancement on her salary to meet housing costs. It's that bad. We did a food drive for our community and ended up giving a couple of boxes to our own members.
It doesn't surprise me. And it gets to, because I want to ask about solutions a little bit, but let me ask, I assume, but I'm going to ask you to answer it, that the recent hikes in gas prices have made this worse. I saw today that they're up about $1 from the end of February. But, not just what is your personal experiences are, more, what's the scuttlebutt around the school? What's the scuttlebutt around the clinic about gas prices? Is that kind of something that everybody is talking about? Have people noticed it? What are people saying? So, Rebecca, why don't we start with you? I saw your hand.
So this one hits me on both sides. I have a 21-mile commute. I'm in Los Lunas. I work for Albuquerque. And initially it was for, cost-effective reasons, and that was fantastic. But I am actually considering the possibility I may have to leave my district to compensate for this if this is our new reality. And then even worse, my families, my students, we do not get transportation. We're in alternative settings, so they have to get themselves to school, and it is impacting attendance. Very much so. I mean, it's already hard enough for them just dealing with car repairs on the daily, and it's showing up really very vividly.
Yeah. In a month, you can see it. Wow.
Yes.
And Vicki, what about you?
I hear more of a discussion, but I do know that in our district, our bus company has had to overlap and pick up 2 different districts. So our students are getting to school late. I don't know that it's necessarily related to the cost of gas, but those kids who aren't getting picked up on time, they need to get their kids off because they have to go to work. So they're sending them in Ubers, and we shouldn't be Ubering our children to or from school. And that cost is getting to be ridiculous for them. I want to say ours is probably up about $1.50 since the end of February.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You were like high to like $2.89, $2.99, and now it's over $4.30 in our area. So yeah, it's gone up quite a bit.
Oh my God. I mean, in my neighborhood, it's gone up about $1. I've seen that, and we've seen that in our driving around. The point is, everybody can see the difference right now. And the irony is that we were on a trajectory, not only in the last administration, but all these Republican administrations too, to actually have alternative sources of fuel. So at the same exact time as Trump actually pulled back on alternative sources of fuel, we now have this huge escalating cost of gas. It's kind of incomprehensible, but I do think that's why I wanted to get a sense of what kind of the scuttlebutt is in your circles, because in my circles, it's almost the only thing people are talking about now anymore. Like how do you make it? What do you do? And, there's this frustration that you're seeing in, I think, the president's poll numbers, but it doesn't seem to be affecting him in terms of the reality of how to solve it. So, Vicki, you said something before that I just want to kind of delve into, because a lot of people think about the healthcare costs. Oh, it's so far away. What does it mean when we no longer have the tax credits for Obamacare? So I suspect when you just said that a bunch of people in the clinic or in your clinic no longer are paying their bills. You want to expand on that a little bit, because I think that starts showing the connection between, federal policy and what happens to individuals.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because we just got our rates for next year for school too, and our insurance rates for the school district are going up 20%.
Oh my God.
20%. We have a lot of members who use the insurance. So that's bad enough. A family PPO is going to cost over $3,300 a month. At the clinic, the insurance companies have you jump through hoop after hoop after hoop. We're on the phone for hours on hold waiting for somebody to take a call to say, oh, we don't have your information. It's a whole hot mess on the customer service side. They're losing records. They authorize something, then they don't, then they need this, then they need that. And at the end of the day, we're continuing to provide the services for our families that we serve. And by the time the insurance processes, they're 8 or 10 sessions in, and now they have this big bill that the insurance decided they're going to decline. And so they're like, well, I guess we can't come anymore, and I guess we don't get paid anymore either. So that...
Are there any insurance that is either better or worse? Because we're starting to go after medical debt in our affordability campaign, which I'll talk about in a minute. But have you noticed any of them that's worse or better? And maybe we can do a corporate campaign about this stuff.
Well, we don't take that many. We are not Medicaid providers, so we don't deal with that at all. The Blue Cross has been the most consistent. but they've been a little shaky lately.
Yeah.
And there's so many branches of it. The clinic is in Indiana, and there's so many different branches of Blue Cross Blue Shield. Our TRICARE, our military benefits, those are always a battle.
And those have been cut. And we saw that in terms of, the cuts to Doge and the cuts also in the, that big tax bill, that reconciliation bill that happened this summer.
Yeah. So I think it's so unfair for those that are serving our countries. They're the ones also suffering and not getting the help that they and their families need. So I would say those are our best and worst. United has always been a hot mess.
Yeah. Always. Yeah. More and more people, I think, even, those who believed in private insurance are starting to talk about single payer and what single payer would mean and how important it would be in terms of really lowering costs for people. We just had a strike in San Francisco over this issue about, individuals were able to get premium-free health insurance, but if you had a family plan, you could be paying up to, $1,500 per child. And so now that strike was about, premium-free healthcare. And so it's this bite that's constantly being taken out of people's pockets. This is what we're seeing, which leads me to, and I started talking to you, both of you, about this before we started taping this podcast. But these kind of conversations have led us to, for the first time ever, to actually say, instead of, pushing for, more money for the programs that we need to serve people, like Title I, like IDEA, this has been something that, you would think of as the AFT's first priority, and it has been forever and ever and ever. How do we get these programs, Social Security, Medicare, how do we get them funded so that people have that social contract? What we have supported this year, and Senator Van Hollen and Senator Kelly just introduced it in the Senate, and it's been introduced in the House of Representatives as well, is working class tax cut, which essentially would mean that up to the cost of living would be exempted from federal taxes. So instead of, having an exemption that goes to $16,000 or, taking a standard deduction, it would be the cost of living, which is about $41,000 individually and about $90,000 in terms of families. And we felt like, as a union, that, that someone in the Congress has to make common cause with working people. And there's not a whole lot of things that the Congress or the president can do immediately to actually try to relieve some of these costs. So the question I have for you is, what do you think about that proposal?
Oh, I really want to dig into that. I mean, it's right now, from what you just, described, it would be a godsend. I mean, again, you talked earlier about putting more money back into our pockets directly. I mean, the long range solutions, I'm in a state where my governor did actually agree to fund Medicaid.
Yeah.
And it was very proactive there. She's got funding available for the present, but that's not a never-ending supply. So of course we're looking at those long-range solutions. How do we get this back to being part of the core of what we get as a benefit from having a Congress, having a representative government, like something for our tax dollars. Yes. But, right now, yes, that sounds like.
And what you just said is also, I think, so important. Something you also just said about Congress, which is all too often, a lot of things that happen in the federal government are really, people don't see or feel for a long time. The Biden administration, they finally made this inroad about negotiating drug prices. But it took so damn long, excuse my language, by the time you go through all the process and this and that, those things are now being negotiated. In the Trump administration, this is called Trump RX. And so Trump is getting the credit for this bill that not one Republican voted for in terms of Build Back Better. But part of what I learned from this process is, chip chopped. You got to move fast. When you take so much time, people feel like it's not real. But that's also why we thought about this working class tax cut, because it can be implemented through the tax code and you could actually see it every time you get a paycheck, because there would be a reduction of the amount of federal income tax that you would have paid. And Vicki, you said this before in terms of the quarterly taxes and what you have to anticipate in terms of that. And so if one knew that, there was less in terms of individually. So I'm going to ask you the same question as I asked Rebecca, which is, we tried to figure out what could we do legislatively. I mean, we know when you bargain a contract, that's probably some of the best economic security. But what can we do legislatively? And that's how we got to this idea about this, federal working class tax cut, which is essentially exempting just up to the cost of living for an individual or a family. So would that help in your circumstance?
Well, it's tax season, right? So we're all working on our taxes right now. And I spoke with my accountant and I said, what are we going to have to do? Because for the longest time, the appropriate deductions weren't being withheld from our paychecks. And they give you this tax table where you're supposed to be able to find your salary and how much you're supposed to pay in taxes. And it might as well be in a foreign language with it makes 0 sense and it doesn't align, because whatever we thought we were supposed to be having withheld just was never enough. So something that simplifies the whole tax system
Would be better.
I'm currently having extra withheld to be able to cover these taxes. It's just, it's painful. We've got to get some kind of relief.
Right. I mean, the tax code has gotten so complicated, and the progressive nature of it, when you have the biggest tax relief goes to billionaires and millionaires or people who have passive income and all of this stuff. So all of a sudden, millionaires and billionaires pay less taxes than a firefighter or a teacher. It's crazy. And you're right. It's very hard. I used to do my own taxes. I have long since stopped and given it to my accountant, who I've had since I went to law school, because I can't. It's hard for me to figure out those tax tables too. I mean, it's really hard. And I think you're completely right. But it should be simplified that, if people who make the most should actually be paying the most, as opposed to people who make the least should be paying the least. We need it to be fair and fairer than it is right now. So let me ask you one other question, because we're trying to take on the affordability issues in many, many ways. One is through collective bargaining, because we know if we can actually bargain a contract that lowers healthcare costs for individuals and their families, that's why I gave the San Francisco example, that raises salaries, that has real retirement benefits, then, that economic security from a contract is the best thing we have. And this is part of the reason we're trying to organize more people. When a third of the country was in unions, you had the most robust middle class. And so we're constantly in a race to organize more to make sure all of this actually happens. But the second piece that's also really, really, really important is this notion of a working class tax cut, trying to do something about healthcare, like what the Affordable Care Act was about, trying to do something to create either more housing or create benefits in terms of your first home or things like that. All of that stuff could be, let's call that policy. But the third is we've created a whole bunch of new tools in our Fight for Affordability campaign to help members navigate, debt and cost of living issues for themselves. And there's a suite of these new empowerment tools and financial literacy clinic offerings and things like that. And Rebecca, I hear that you have actually used some of these tools. So I just wanted to ask you, is it helpful? A lot of people say, oh no, another tool. But is it helpful? Is it, because we wanted this to be a three-legged stool about this stuff.
It was, in fact. And you're right. I had to carve in some time to really dig in. But the surprise billing that comes with healthcare costs, particularly for preventative female health. Mm-hmm. So I jumped in on a webinar, and I was very, very interested in everything that you had available to negotiate those surprise costs. I did actually use it for a few of my dealings most recently. I've got some good medical debt. I've avoided it up to very recently. I have actually put off procedures. I have done the whole weighing. Is this something that I, will bring about immediate death, or is this something I can push out a few years? I've had that conversation with myself. So yes, it was worth my time. It really was.
Fantastic.
You're moving in the right direction. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we want to make sure that we just want to really make sure that we can do things that are useful for people. So let me just ask both of you final thoughts in terms of this. I've taken so much of your time today, but I really, really, really appreciate it because I think it's important. We have to stop people from feeling like this is their burden only. This is really the burden of when people work hard and play by the rules, they should be able to support their families, period, full stop, without having the anxiety that I hear today. And so, that is part of what we're trying to change, and that's part of what we're trying to do. So final thoughts from either one of you? And I just really, really, really am so grateful for your time and for your candidacy.
I just want to thank you and the AFT for working so hard on our behalf. We're doing boots on the ground where we are participating in full funding Fridays for our First Fridays for Illinois and things of that nature. So we're working really hard for the people here as well. It would be nice to see some relief, some light at the end of the tunnel. But right now we all kind of feel like we're marching in darkness, and it's getting hard to encourage people to continue to fight.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that you're continuing to do that. And before I get to Rebecca, part of the fights that we're taking on is a lot of us are involved in No Kings this weekend, March 28th. And that is part of showing that communities across the country want a better life, and that the government has to help us do that. Not just help the gazillionaires, but help everyone do what the promise of America is in terms of that social contract. Rebecca, last thoughts.
I'm feeling a little hopeful right now. I'm still feeling the weight of it and a little exhausted, not going to lie. But I'm relieved to hear that. And I have to agree. You tackling the policymakers right now, bringing those structural solutions, not the temporary fixes, but also something a little more immediate. Oh, yeah. I could use that. And thank you. But, I really need to see some real accountability around the healthcare costs, protections against the large insurance premium increases for educators. But like you triggered me, Vicki, when you spoke up earlier about what your increase is for this year. In the last 2 years, we've taken on 25% ourselves. So coverage for that preventative care, a little more sensitivity toward women's health. Wages need to be meaningfully tied to that actual cost of living. I'd love to see that. Broader debt relief. I'm glad that that's something, Randi, that you're really focusing on. Because yes, I can say it. I have definitely dipped into the credit cards just to cover utilities in the summer in New Mexico.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your efforts, and I'll be there. No kings, here I
Fantastic.
come.
Fantastic. So I want to say to both of you, I mean, look, I feel a lot of hope because I'm talking to both of you. You represent, who our members are in terms of people who are really working hard for other people. And that is who we represent and have the honor to represent. And this is really an all hands on deck moment. And, one job should be enough if one works hard. A decent life free from debt and anxiety should be part of the social contract. That is who that's what a middle class life is supposed to be. And so we're going to keep on fighting for real economic relief for working people in every way we can. And I just really want to thank you, Vicki, and you, Rebecca, for joining us today to actually really put context around what this is, that this is not just a chant. This is not just a saying, that this is real, and what we do as a union is real for people. And so I just really want to say thank you for sharing in a really, amazing way what your families are going through. And for everybody else, thank you for listening. And we'll talk to you at the next episode of Union Talk. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Randy.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Union Talk. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and tune in every other week for a new episode. Thank you, be safe, and be well.